One of the largest myths I see out there, particularly with avoidant personalities, is that they just don't care. Everyone says they're emotionless, or they moved on so quickly, or they didn't love me at all, but that's not the case. That's what it seems like from the outside, but underneath that aloof, detached shell is a whole different tale. Avoidants do care, sometimes more than they even know. They just don't express it in ways that most people are familiar with. Their calmness, their space, their reserve when facing separation. It's not serenity, it's a defense. You see, at some point, an avoidant learned that vulnerability is danger. Perhaps it was rejection as a child. Perhaps it was an emotionally unavailable parent. Perhaps it was being told, in so many words or not, that their feelings were irrelevant. So they constructed walls, not to harm, but because at some time it was the only means of safety. And when you go no contact, when you withdraw from someone like that, doesn't merely isolate them, it also forces them to face that very wound they've spent their entire life trying to keep from hurting them. Here's the irony: avoidants are just as needy for connection as everybody else. They crave love, they crave intimacy. But love for them is a war. It's going to bring out all those deep seated fears of rejection, of being noticed and potentially not welcomed. So when things become heated, when emotions are raw, their tendency is to retreat, space out. It is not because they are not invested. It is because they are so invested that it is frightening. And that's why no contact hurts them more than you realize. They may initially appear okay. They'll present themselves as in control, sane. They'll tell themselves this is best, that they needed space. But behind that sane facade, a tempest is brewing. Because for the first time, they're not the ones with the option of controlling the emotional landscape. You are. You've deprived them of their power of control of the emotional equation. And for an avoidant, control is paramount. It's the way that they contain the pain, the way that they make their world predictable. When that control is stripped away, the feelings that they've been keeping down begin to emerge slowly, quietly, but with great force. You see, when an anxious person experiences pain, they experience it in the moment. They cry, they seek out, they verbalize it. But for an avoidant, when they experience pain, it's at a later time. It's like a slow fire. They don't express it, but it permeates through the emptiness. And when it does catch up to them, it lands hard. That's why no contact can feel like a delayed detonation. By the time they know what they've lost, what's been taken, it's usually too late to send an invitation to reconnect. What I want you to know, if you're the one cutting off or the one who was cut off, is that an avoidance calm is not indifference. It's a facade, a conditioned response, a survival tactic. When you vanish, it doesn't just create a space in their world, it rattles the foundation of the belief system that's been safeguarding them for years. They begin to wonder, why does this hurt? Why am I missing this person if I wanted to be left alone? Why can't I simply move on? That is the cracks in the armor, the first hints that the walls aren't working anymore. And here's where things change. Pain, particularly pain that's unexpected, is an intense educator. For the avoidant, that silence, that nothingness, becomes the mirror that reflects back to them what they've been hiding from all along. Truth, that connection is not weakness, that love is not the enemy, that vulnerability is something to fear, it's something to learn. So the next time you witness an avoidant behaving disconnected, don't think they don't care. They care more than you can understand. They're just lugging around years of conditioning that says it's not okay to express it. No contact doesn't ricochet off of them, it penetrates them, just slow, quiet under the surface. And that's why, in the long term, it tends to hurt them a lot more than appears. You see, when we discuss avoidance, people tend to describe it like it's some sort of personality defect, like a person is simply cold, aloof, or unlovable. Avoidance is not a character defect. It's not who they are, it's a coping mechanism. It's an acquired emotional strategy brick by brick, sometimes from childhood when intimacy felt dangerous or love was conditional. Along the way, the avoidant learned, if I remain in charge of my feelings, I won't get hurt. Not that they're not empathetic. They are. It's just that they've learned to equate emotional expression with risk. When you're raised in a culture where your needs are not acknowledged or where vulnerability makes you shamed or unseen, you begin to change. You tell yourself, I'll quit needing so much. I'll just look to myself. And that independence becomes protection. It becomes the self. But beneath that protection, there's still the same human heart, still the same desire for love, for connection, safety. The thing is, the avoidant doesn't trust anyone else to provide them with that safety, so they attempt to create it themselves by regulating how close people can get. And then consider what that does in relationships. An avoidant can love you with all their heart, but the closer you become, the more their fear begins to increase. They might start to feel suffocated, not because you've done anything wrong, but because closeness threatens the wall they've built to stay safe. They'll start to pull back, create distance, pick small fights, focus on your flaws, or convince themselves the relationship isn't right. It's not about you, it's about protection. Every time they feel emotionally overwhelmed, they retreat to the familiar, distance, logic, distraction. But here's the irony: the same strategy that once shielded them now isolates them. Avoidance was effective when they were children, when safety in the emotional realm was a distant dream. For grown-ups, it becomes a snare, because each time they withdraw from love, they reinforce the perception that they are not able to manage intimacy. They remain safe, yes, but they remain isolated. And the more isolated they grow, the more difficult it becomes to trust, to become vulnerable, to love without restrictions. When no contact occurs, that defense is pushed to its limits as never before, because for the first time, the avoidant can't control their sense of safety by being away. They're already away. They're stuck with the one thing they've ever wanted to escape their feelings. The silence is deafening. The protection device turns on itself. What kept pain out now holds it in. And that's when the breakthrough starts, if they allow it. Because in that place, when the defenses are dropped, when control is no longer an option, the truth emerges. The truth that they weren't steering clear of you, they were steering clear of the parts of themselves that still ache. Parts that still recall rejection, the parts that never managed to grasp it was all right to be needed. That's why it's so potent to reimagine avoidance, not as a weakness, but as a narrative of survival. When you can view it that way, you no longer take their distance to heart. You stop running after the wall. Instead, you start to comprehend that below all of that control, all of that quiet, there's someone who is afraid of losing themselves in love and just as afraid of never, ever being loved. And that's the actual paradox of the avoidant. They crave connection as much as everybody else. The very mechanism they employ to insulate themselves from pain becomes the roadblock to all they really want. When the avoidant loses touch, when the silence descends, it doesn't merely create a void. It deprives them of something much more basic, a sense of safety, because for an avoidant, safety is not in comfort or closeness like it is for everyone else. Safety is in control, control of their feelings, control of their space, control of the amount of themselves that they open up to the world. That control is their emotional shield, their air. And when you go no contact, when you just vanishes from their life, it's like pulling that air away. You see, an avoidant craves predictability. They may have one foot in and one foot out. As long as they control when to put the foot forward and when to take it back, they're safe. It's not dominance, it's regulation. It's how they control anxiety without ever really having to face it head on. So when you become no contact, they don't have that regulatory control anymore. Suddenly, they can't scan your messages, can't feel out the waters, can't back down on their terms. That quiet becomes something they can't control or anticipate, and that rattles their whole emotional infrastructure. They'll initially tell themselves they're okay. They'll tell themselves, this is fine, I needed space anyway. They'll immerse themselves in work, hobbies, distractions. They may even feel relieved for a little while, because avoidance is all about getting away from intensity, and no contact at first appears to be relief from that intensity. But the thing is, relief and peace are not the same. Relief is short-lived, it's an exhale. Peace is sustained, it's healing. And as weeks become days, the relief wears off. Quiet place they thought they desired begins to reverberate back the very feelings they've worked so long to avoid. You see, when the avoidant loses that safety net, when you're no longer around to test boundaries, to establish connection, keep emotional rhythm going, they're left to their own with the din inside their own mind. The things they've buried begin to surface. Did I push too hard? Why do I feel so empty? Why can't I just move on? And because they have spent their lives maintaining emotion at arm's length, they do not have the means to deal with it. They attempt to reason their way through what can only be felt. And that is where the actual pain sets in, not the instant heartbreak you may experience when contact is severed, but a more insidious, subtle pain that seeps in over time, because now they have to confront the truth. Their walls did not shield them from loss. Their distance did not insulate them from heartbreak. In fact, it made the heartbreak more isolating. That's why no contact, painful as it is, becomes such a potent mirror. It teaches the avoidant that control and safety are not the same thing. It teaches them that emotional distance does not prevent them from being hurt. It just postpones the pain and makes it sharper when it arrives. That scaffolding of control they've lived behind for so long begins to crack, and beneath it is a person waking up, usually for the very first time, to see that avoidance does not shield them, it alienates them. And here's the twist: the same silence they used to guard themselves against now becomes the educator. It makes them listen, feel, question the assumption that intimacy is risk. Love is agony. It doesn't occur overnight. It's an agonizing, relentless process, but that's where change starts, because until they get rid of the safety net, they'll never catch sight of how much of their emotional lives have been spent behind the bars they built for themselves. So when you go no contact, it is not punishment. It is a reset. It is the moment when the avoidance system catches up that safety doesn't issue from control. It issues from authenticity, from truth, giving themselves permission to feel, to grieve, to desire. And that revelation, that still hurting awakening, is what begins the process of change. When we are speaking of avoidance and emotional pain, timing is crucial. They don't feel it when you expect them to. When the breakup happens, when no contact starts, when you're falling apart, they're calm, detached, rational. It almost feels unfair, doesn't it? You're breaking inside, and they're out there looking composed, like nothing even touched them. That calm, that's not healing, that's suppression, because avoidants don't escape pain. They delay it, they push it down, tuck it neatly behind logic, behind distraction, behind that voice that says, I'm fine. But pain has a way of waiting. It doesn't disappear, it incubates. At first, the avoidant feels relief. The pressure of emotional closeness is gone. No more uncomfortable conversations, no more tension. They tell themselves this is what they wanted. They may even feel free because they're back in their comfort zone space, distance, control. They don't know that relief is merely the eye of the storm. For once the cacophony subsides, once distractions fade, silence starts echoing, and that's when the pain begins to seep in. Avoidants hurt later, but when they do, they hurt deeper. Because by then the feelings have been condensed, unworked, and amplified by guilt and confusion. They'll begin to recall moments, not the fights or the tension, but the laughter, the intimacy, the small gestures that made them feel noticed. And that's when it hurts most, because avoidants don't always know the value of connection until after it's been lost. You see, for most human beings, emotional pain arrives in waves. You weep, you work it out, you recover. But for an avoidant, it's like constructing a dam. They stack up logic diversions, self-comforts, until the emotional flow is entirely clogged. But dams break, and when they break, the flood isn't soft. It's watercourse, tampering, catastrophic. All at once, everything they've been afraid to feel, grief, loss, regret, yearning, comes flooding in at once. And because they never knew how to feel safely, they suffocate in their own stifled emotion. They'll replay it in their head, not to dwell, but to attempt to make sense of it. Avoidance, intellectualized feeling, they need to break it down, repair it, contain it. But heartbreak is not a puzzle to be solved. It's something to be felt. And that's what makes it so excruciating for them. They can't think their way out of feelings. They can't control something that resides in the body, something that insists on being experienced, not explained. And so they withdraw, they vanish, they may pull away from friends, immerse themselves in work, act like they've moved on. But behind the act, a growing quiet agony. They will look at your social media when they vowed they wouldn't. They will consider texting you but hold back, torn between pride and desire, because to acknowledge missing you is to acknowledge feeling, and feeling is precisely what their whole system of defense was constructed to prevent. But this is the reality. They do experience it. They only experience it later, when nobody is looking, at night, during quiet hours, when nothing is left to divert their attention, and in those times they see the price for their evasion. The same walls that protected them have protected them from other people too. Space that seemed to liberate them now seems like banishment, and they begin to understand that avoiding pain doesn't protect you. It just postpones it until it hurts even more. This is where the change starts, because pain, when it breaks through at last, is the great wake-up call. It's the point at which the avoidant begins to learn that escape doesn't work. That emotional safety isn't in distance, but that connection doesn't have to be loss. It can be healing, growth, completeness. So yes, avoidance appears serene when no contact is initiated. That serenity won't last, because emotions, no matter how well hidden, always manage to surface. And when they do, they don't just break the walls, they tear them down. And that's when finally The avoidant feels again not the pain of losing you, the pain of losing themselves behind all that control. One of the biggest delusions avoidants live under, the one they cling to with everything they have, is the idea that they don't need anyone, that they are totally independent, self-sufficient, unscathed. It's like a badge of honor. I don't need anyone. I can do it all myself. But here's the reality most people fail to see, especially the avoidant themselves, that independence is not freedom, it's a shield. It's an illusion, because no matter how capable, strong, or emotionally guarded someone is, every human being is wired for connection. It's not weakness, it's biology. Avoidants boast that they're in charge. They don't need love to be fine. That's not strength, though. That's a costume of strength for fear. Real independence isn't about being alone. It's about being able to engage without sacrificing yourself. But connection for the avoidant is risky because somewhere down the line, dependency was equated with disappointment. Love was unstable. Perhaps affection was offered one moment and then taken away. Perhaps every time they reached out, they were unheard or criticized. They learned to turn in towards themselves, to depend only on themselves, to never have too much, never ask for too much, never risk too much, and then no contact is made. Suddenly, that fantasy of independence is put to the test. The quiet they once longed for is deafening. The space they supposed they desired begins to feel hollow. Because when they no longer feel your presence, when there is no one to draw back from, they find themselves facing the truth that their concept of independence isn't tranquility, it's solitude. At first, they'll rationalize it. They'll say, I'm fine on my own. I always bounce back. I didn't need this relationship anyway. But that's the protective voice, the one that steps in to prevent vulnerability. Yet over time, that voice starts to sound hollow. They begin to notice the quiet, the way their victories don't feel as fulfilling, the way the little moments, good news, bad days, full mornings, feel emptier without someone to share them with. Because that's what happens when an avoidant loses contact. They lose their mirror. Relationships, romantic or otherwise, reflect us back at ourselves. They reveal our patterns, our fears, our possibilities. When you go no contact, that mirror vanishes. And the avoidant is left alone with reflection, the one they've been running from. It's raw, uncomfortable, and exposing. They begin to grasp that what they referred to as independence was really emotional self-protection. It wasn't that they didn't need other people. It was that they didn't trust others would remain. And that's when the cracks start to appear in the fantasy, because secretly they do miss connection. They miss being heard without having to say it all. They miss feeling viewed, even if that sensation frightened them. And when they can no longer stretch for that connection, the loneliness strikes harder than they ever imagined. Here is where the awakening begins. Because the illusion of self-sufficiency can only last as long as it doesn't get confronted, but quiet confronts it. No interaction confronts it. When the world is quiet and there are no longer any mouths to feed on blame, the avoidant must confront the truth. I do need other people. I do crave love. I just never learned how to need safely. And that awareness, agonizing as it is, can be the start of repair. Because the moment an avoidant realizes that needing others isn't weakness, it's human, something breaks. They begin to realize that strength is actually not in keeping everyone out. It's in learning how to let one person in without losing themselves. So when no contact occurs, merely a parting, it's an unveiling. It strips away the facade of control and independence that's kept the avoidant safe but small. And in that room, alone, unsure, bereft of distraction, they begin to experience the reality they've suppressed for years, that love is not a danger, it's a requirement. And that self-reliance without attachment isn't liberty, it's isolation. Emotional repression always comes at a cost. You can't keep shoving feelings below the surface without paying somewhere, mentally, physically, spiritually. And avoidants, most of all, bear that price quietly. They believe they've got control down pat. They remind themselves that they're cool under fire, not bothered by disruption, impervious to heartbreak. But what they've actually become experts at is emotional containment. They've learned to hold everything in, to suffocate their pain so thoroughly that even they begin to think it's been eradicated. But repressed feeling doesn't go away. It accrues, it earns interest. And it weighs more over time: numbness, resentment, anxiety, even fatigue. Because emotions are energy. They're signals, bills from your body and your heart that something requires attention, that something's off kilter. When we push them away, We're not eliminating those signals, we're just cutting the wire to the alarm. The fire still smolders beneath. The avoidant says to themselves, I don't want to deal with this right now, and the feeling is pushed to the subconscious, piled upon the rest of the unresolved emotions, grief, fear, anger, longing, and each one quietly piles on to their inner load. To the outside world, the avoidant appears steady, accomplished, even admirable. They may appear calm in disagreement, unmoved by emotional drama, but in their heads, they're like a wound upspring. Each unspoken truth, each swallowed feeling builds up more tension. And then something small, something insignificant jumps out at them as an overreaction. Perhaps it's a remark, an image, a tune, an utter. And suddenly all that pent up emotion floods back, and they don't even know why they're feeling so consumed. That's the price of suppression. It doesn't keep out pain, it keeps it back. And when it comes back, it's compounded. And now add no contact to that equation. For the avoidant, quiet amplifies all that they've been suppressing. There's no outlet for emotions anymore, no individual to manage against with subtle manipulation, no comfortable dynamic to retreat into. The mind begins rehashing old scenes, attempting to squelch the pain, but the heart starts fighting back. That's when the insomnia creeps in, or fidgeting, or an unexpected bout of depression that appears out of nowhere. It's the emotional debt coming due, the feelings they've deferred finally demanding to be felt. And here's where it gets sneaky, because avoidants are masters of suppression. They don't even know it's occurring. They'll label it as stress, burnout. They'll dig themselves further into work, into distractions, into logic. But the reality is their system, emotionally, mentally, even physically, is craving release. The body is aware. Soul is aware. The price tag of evading emotion is separation, not only from others, but from yourself. That's the tragedy of emotional avoidance. It gives a false appearance of calm, but quietly destroys your capacity to feel joy, intimacy, excitement. You can't selectively numb emotion. If you avoid sadness, you also dim happiness. If you don't feel pain, you also tone down passion. And that's what gradually occurs to the avoidant. They give up the richness of life for control. Here's the wonderful thing. The same walls that hold off pain can also come crumbling down to admit healing. Suppression can turn to expression. Silence can become awareness. It begins the very moment they cease to flee from what they feel and instead move toward it. The first time they sit with the pain and say, I don't have to fix this, I just have to feel it, everything begins to shift. Because the true cost of suppression isn't the pain itself, it's the opportunity for growth lost. Every suppressed emotion is a message unopened, a lesson unlearned, an aspect of the self yet to be reclaimed. And when no contact wipes away the distractions, that's when those messages begin to emerge at last. That's when the avoidant, perhaps for the first time, begins to hear to their own heart, to their own truth, feelings they've kept hidden far too long. At the end of the day, no matter how desperately one attempts to deny it, repress it, or flee from it, the human desire for connection always prevails. You can't outthink it, you can't outwork it, and you can't outcontrol it. It's hardwired into us. It's as automatic as breathing. We are human, social, emotional, deeply connected beings, and even those who claim independence, who construct walls and exist in logic, ultimately, they experience the pang of loneliness. That inner yearning for closeness doesn't disappear. It simply waits for a moment of quiet to make itself noticed. Avoidants spend so much of their lives working to control that need. They attempt to substitute connection for control, intimacy for productivity, love for independence, and it works for a while. They feel independent, shielded, invulnerable. But here is the reality. The need for connection is not something you can suppress. It is something you can temporarily silence. For because the moment life gets slower, the moment distractions disappear, inner voice speaks again. I don't want to be alone. No contact makes that whisper ring louder. Initially, the avoidant hears it as discomfort, as restlessness, perhaps even as confusion. But as time passes, it becomes irrefutable, because no matter how much they insist they're okay without anyone, their biology does not. Science confirms it. Our brains are literally hardwired for attachment. Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, all of it is meant to attach us, to cause connection to feel pleasurable, aloneness to feel wrong. You can't compete with millions of years of evolution with a few fancy defense strategies. When contact is lost on an avoidant, primitive need for connection begins to emerge below the defenses. The quiet becomes intolerable, not because they need drama or attention, but because they need connection. They miss the emotional cadence, the check-ins, the warmth, the presence. They might not say it, they might not even consciously know it, but their nervous system knows it. Their heart knows it. And the longer the silence goes on, the more they start to realize that the autonomy they prized so highly was founded on avoidance rather than peace. And that's where it gets interesting, because that need for human connection doesn't just draw them to others, it starts drawing them to themselves. When they can no longer outsource their emotional management to distance, they begin to see how disconnected they've been from their own emotions. No contact makes them realize that connection isn't just reaching outward, it's also about reaching inward. It's about reconnecting with the parts of themselves they abandoned long ago in the name of safety. And once that journey starts, something amazing happens. The avoidant begins to soften. Perhaps they call an old friend, perhaps they begin journaling or introspecting or even feeling feelings they didn't permit before. It's subtle, but it's deep, because that's where they come to realize that craving connection doesn't render them weak, it makes them human, and that the strength they've been running towards all this time wasn't in avoidance, it's in authenticity. Tony Robbins would have said this: connection is not a luxury, it's a necessity. You can have all the success in the world, but without love, without meaningful connection, you'll still feel empty. That's the reality avoidants come face to face with eventually. You cannot fill the emptiness of disconnection with success, control, or isolation. The only thing that fills it is vulnerability, being open to being seen, heard, and known. When complete contact strips them of their distractions and control, it doesn't kill them, it wakes them. It forces them to confront the strongest human truth that love, belonging, and connection are not choices. They are the pulse of life itself. And no matter how far they run from it, that pulse calls them home. Silence is one of those things that slices through all the noise. It takes away the stories, the defenses, the distractions, and brings it all that's buried to the surface. For an avoidant, that silence is not merely quiet, it's confronting. It touches something raw, something primal. Because beneath all the composure, all the control, all the logic, there's a secret wound, an attachment wound, that no contact calls back to life in full screaming force. When the silence starts, they don't know what's going on. It begins as a sense of unease, a foreign discomfort that they can't label. Their body becomes rigid, their mind speeds. They'll distract themselves, justify the situation, perhaps even tell themselves they're better off. But inside, something primal is happening. That silence is bearing down on the very nerve they've been trying for years to deaden, that one of abandonment, worthlessness, or forgetfulness. Each avoidant bears some form of that injury. It's the scar from early experiences in which love was conditional or unpredictable. Perhaps love was given by achievement. Perhaps vulnerability led to rejection or shame. Or perhaps love was not present when they needed it most. So they adapted. They learned to not ask, not need, not feel. They constructed safety and self-reliance. But the silence of no contact doesn't honor that safety. It dismantles it. It mirrors the old wound. It says, you're alone on again. And suddenly, without warning, they're reliving the emotional blueprint that shaped their entire approach to love. It's not conscious. It's not dramatic. It's subtle but powerful. They might find themselves feeling irritable, restless, even detached in a way that doesn't feel comforting anymore, because the old habit, pull away, distance, withdraw, felt safe once. But now, with no touch, it doesn't feel peaceful, it feels hollow. That's when the mind begins to whisper old, comfortable lies. You're not enough. You'll always be abandoned. You don't matter. And because those messages are anchored in their earliest moments, they strike hard. But that's where the change starts. Silence doesn't only cause the wound, it uncovers it. It reveals to them what's been driving their emotional life behind the scenes. It confronts them with the disparity between who they believe they are, strong, capable, impenetrable, and who they actually are beneath all the armor, a person who's been wanting to be noticed, accepted, and loved in safety. And that's why no contact can be so cruel to an avoidant. It's not the person's absence. They're capable of dealing with distance. It's the absence of reassurance that they are important. It's the silence that sends back all the emotions they've suppressed. They can't call to repair it. They can't think their way around it. They can't make it go away. The silence just lingers, patient, truthful, and merciless, making them look at themselves without distraction. Some avoidants react to this by shutting down even more, going deeper into avoidance. Others, however, begin to wake up. They notice the link between their fear of intimacy and fear of abandonment, two sides of the same coin. They get that their remoteness was never due to lack of interest, it was about safety. And they begin to ask the right questions. Why do I pull away from love? Why do I associate proximity with danger? What am I actually in fear of losing? Someone else or me? That's where healing begins. Not in the din of attempting to repair things, but in the quiet of finally confronting what's been concealed. Because that quiet, as uncomfortable as it is, doesn't merely reveal their wounds, it allows them an opportunity to heal them. So when an avoidant gets hit with no contact, it's not merely about missing someone, it's about confronting their own pain for the very first time. It's their subconsciousness finally whispering, it's time to stop running. And while it's painful, while it's intolerable at times, that quiet is the start of something amazing. The point when they can finally shift from fear to freedom, from avoidance to awareness, from survival to connection. No one grows in comfort. It grows in the friction, in the discomfort, in the moments that push them beyond what they believe they can endure. And for avoidance, discomfort is often the silence, the space, the loss of control that no contact creates. It's in that space when the walls stop working, when the strategies fail, when the heart begins to ache in ways they can't reason through. That's where the growth begins. See, for so long, the avoidance life revolves around avoidance, avoiding confrontation, avoiding vulnerability, avoiding emotional chaos. It's not indifference or laziness, it's protection. Protection and growth can't happen at the same time. You can't grow while hiding. You can't evolve while protecting the same walls that confine you. No contact is that moment when the universe intervenes and says, enough. It removes the safety nets, the distractions, the loopholes, and it leaves the avoidant with their truth staring back in the mirror. At first, they'll fight it. They'll double down on control, on logic, on distraction. But unease has a way of penetrating resistance. It erodes defenses not with force, but with relentlessness. It keeps turning up through the quiet, through the loneliness, through the nagging pang of missing someone they can't acknowledge they miss. That's when they begin to ask new questions, not questions of how to get out of the pain, but of what the pain is going to teach them. Because that's the key. Pain is information. All the feelings we avoid have something to tell us. The anxiety is saying there's something not resolved. The loneliness is saying you're disconnected. The grief is saying you cared more than you knew. When the avoidant finally tires of combating those feelings and begins to hear them, growth is automatic. They start to learn that feelings are not enemies, they're guides. And what they've considered weakness, feeling deeply, is really strength in disguise. But growth through discomfort doesn't just happen to the avoidant, it happens to the person who walked away too. Going no contact isn't easy. It's an act of courage. It's saying, I'm not going to chase someone who can't meet me halfway. I'm going to honor my own worth, even if it hurts. That's a different kind of growth, one rooted in self-respect, boundaries, and self-love. Because whereas the avoidant is learning to confront their emotions, the other is learning to cease taking responsibility for the healing of another. Both are being taught the same lesson from opposite sides. Real love begins with the relationship you have with yourself. Tony Robbins states, life is happening for you, not to you, and that's precisely what this phase of discomfort is. It is not punishment, it is preparation. It's life stripping away what no longer serves you so you can grow into who you're meant to be. For the avoidant, breakdown before the breakthrough, the dismantling of the false self that pretends not to need love. For the other, it's the reclaiming of power that was once given away in pursuit of connection. When the avoidant stays with the silence long enough, something breaks. The hurt that had been so unbearable begins to become understandable. They start to understand patterns, how their fear of pain caused the very isolation they dreaded most. And in that, something amazing occurs: accountability. They no longer blame, no longer run, and begin owning their feelings. That's where transformation happens, not when they cease hurting, but when they cease avoiding. Discomfort then becomes the bridge between who they were and who they can be. It's not punishment, it's invitation. An invitation to feel, to grow, to love differently. Because only by facing what's uncomfortable can anyone, avoidant or not, become free. So if you're in that silent phase, if it hurts, if it feels unbearable, remember this: pain is not the end of the story, it's the doorway. Growth exists on the other side of pain, and for the avoidant, for you, for anyone who is willing to step through that pain with bravery, what lies on the other side is not loss, liberation. Real power doesn't originate from control. It doesn't reside in keeping people at arm's length, being right, or showing you don't care. Real power emerges from emotional ownership, from being face to face with your own feelings, your own fear, and declaring, this is mine, I built this, and I have the ability to transform it. And that's where freedom starts. Avoidants spend most of their lives thinking control equals strength. If they can just control their emotions, maintain predictability, stay one step ahead of rejection, they'll be safe. But safety is not strength, safety is comfort, and comfort does not change anyone. Power is being honest with yourself, being honest about what you feel, what you need, and what you've been avoiding. No contact, as difficult as it is, makes that possible. It takes away the noise. It makes the avoidance stop controlling everyone else's impression and finally confront their own image. Early on, that reflection is difficult to regard. It's painful, it's regretful, bewildered, perhaps even shameful. But when they remain with it, when they cease defending and begin listening, something amazing transpires. They understand that emotional vulnerability is not frailty, and as reality is where all change starts. Tony Robbins puts it best: change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And that's precisely what this moment is all about. When the pain of avoidance, suppression, and isolation finally outweighs the comfort of control, the avoidance starts to change. They begin to feel again. They begin to be responsible, not for how others treated them, but for how they reacted, how they covered up, how they shut down. And that's where true growth occurs, when they shift from blame to responsibility. Having your feelings isn't about letting them control your life. It's about no longer letting fear control your decisions. It's about examining your sadness, your anger, your desire, and rather than hiding it, you ask, what is this here to teach me? That's what emotional mastery is. Never the lack of suffering, but the capacity to stand in it and transform because of it. And this is the most incredible part. When an avoidant learns to take ownership of their feelings, everything shifts. The relationships they form become richer. Their connections get more real. They no longer need control in order to feel safe, and they begin trusting themselves enough to be vulnerable. They transition from survival mode to living mode, from escaping love to being willing to receive it. This isn't just about avoidance, it's about all of us, because every single one of us at some point has erected emotional walls. Every one of us has sidestepped pain. The lesson here is for everyone. Your strength is in your willingness to feel, to own your emotional landscape rather than farming it out to somebody else, to break the habit of waiting for someone else to change and begin changing yourself. That's the spirit of real healing, not sitting around waiting for closure, not exacting revenge, not trying to prove yourself worthy, but rising up in your own authenticity and declaring, this experience made me stronger, it taught me who I am, and I choose to learn from it. So, if you're the one who had to go no contact, remember that quiet isn't heartlessness, it's self-respect. It's the spark that might one day wake up the other person, and it's already changing you. And if you're the avoidant reading this, know this: you are not broken, you are not unlovable, you are simply human learning to rebuild bridges to the parts of yourself you've long hidden. Because ultimately, no contact doesn't merely make distance, it makes clarity. It incinerates the illusions and is left with only truth. And that truth, as painful as it might be, is where true power starts. Power to feel, power to change, power to love again, not out of fear, but out of freedom. That's where healing resides. That's where life grows. That's where you become invincible.